I recently had a chance to hang out with Rick Priestley at his current digs at Warlord Games. His name has been synonymous with 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, and all things GW for a long time, more than a quarter of a century now. He helped develop their game systems, their rules, their fluff, their universes, almost everything that current GW has. Rick Priestley helped influence at the very beginning. He is currently working at Warlord Games. Of course, he has got Bolt Action, Black Powder, Hail Caesar, Gates of Antares, and the Red Book of the Elf King, which is one of his recent releases. It was a pleasure just to hang out, talk with him, talk about his past, share some black British humor, and a few laughs. I hope you enjoy the interview.
Tales from the Outer Rim.
So we're here at Warlord with Rick Priestley.
Hello.
Rick, I have to admit that the first time I met you, I was scared shitless that I thought you're actually one of my heroes back in the day.
Yeah, well, you soon learn different, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no worries.
Yes, I was speechless, and I couldn't think of things to ask you and everything, and I was actually a little bit embarrassed about it.
Normally you go, would you like a pint?
That's right. That would be an okay thing to do, right?
That's perfectly acceptable. Gambit.
I've learned. Do you think of anybody, and this could be anyone, any time period that you would, if you would meet, that you would be stuttering, you would be speechless?
Well, probably Hitler. I mean, that'd be quite especially with him being German. You know, apart from Ich bin ein Berliner, I don't really know very much German.
No, that's right. What are you going to say?
What are you going to say? I'd have a similar problem with virtually everyone. Can think of it.
I know that you've had a lot of history in the wargaming industry. Can you tell us how it kind of started? What when you were young, how you made the switch into doing what you do now?
I don't know really. I just have always done it, so it's not. I don't think I ever switched as such. I went straight from being someone who was as a hobbyist and kind of created games and painted models and even made models as a hobby into being someone who sort of did it, not say professionally, but did it in conjunction with a commercial aim or enterprise.
Right.
So there never really was a moment. The first thing I published was when I was still at school. Yeah, I was just about still at school.
Still at high school?
I don't know what high school is.
Oh, so the end of your pre-adult.
Yes, sixth form. I
Wow.
was in fact. Let me see. I'd be 18.
18ish.
Yeah,
Wow.
18.
That's awesome. And so, did you find someone right away to transition into that? Like what? So, what was that thing that you?
It was a set of war games rules called Reaper. Richard Halliwell, who I was at school with, my friend Richard Halliwell, we did a lot of projects together. So we wrote a lot of games and we created games and collected armies and played. Mostly for our own use and also our friends, and there was a local club and that sort of thing. And we basically put together a set of fantasy rules that we thought were the bee's knees. This was 1978.
Okay.
So
That's
this is the
early.
very early days of D&D, really.
Right. Yeah.
And we were a little bit. Our nose was put out of joint a bit by D&D because when that turned up, we thought, well, we've been doing this for years in a different sort of format, but
Right.
similar kind of stuff. So we thought, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And if you saw the original D&D,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I bought when I was.
yeah, well, production
young,
standards were not exactly awesome, were they? They were still
Right.
for the day. They weren't bad, but the
Oh yeah,
the quality of illustration, and everything was quite enthusiastic.
yeah, yeah. We were just talking about that when we were in New York. Actually, how they were. The art wasn't nearly as incredible as it is now, but it still was evocative of what they wanted to get across, right?
I think so, yeah. And I think the audience was much more, I won't say forgiving is not quite the right word, but you didn't expect so much. I think your
Right.
expectancies of something
Right.
were very much, well, not even low, isn't it? They were just different.
Yeah.
So I mean, we were quite excited by D&D, really, just as much as we slightly resented the fact they'd stolen our thunder.
Right.
This idea of fantasy adventuring.
Right.
And they'd done it much better than us as well, really. because we were kids after all.
That's
you know.
right.
But we had this game, and it's called Reaper, and it was a Warhammer-like, but it was a sort of skirmish cum role-play game. And we basically thought, well, who's going to publish this for us? So we phoned up a company that started to make fantasy figures in the UK,
Right.
called Asgard Miniatures.
Okay.
And Asgard Miniatures was founded by, I think it's 3 guys actually, but the guy we got in touch with, who was I think he was really the chap that was in charge of it, was Brian Ansell.
Well, yeah, Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, you may even be talking to him.
We hope to talk to him on Monday. Actually.
Well, Brian was one of the founders of Asgard, and I think he was the leading light in Asgard, really. So we phoned, and more to the point, his address and telephone number were on the advert
Oh, really?
for Asgard. So we phoned him up and said, "Oh, we've got this game, and we're trying to find a publisher. Are you interested?" And Brian, being always someone to encourage a potential sort of valuable or commercial interest,
Right.
thought agreed to see us. So we went
nice.
over to Nottingham, and we took our game and we demoed it and everything. And I think Brian at the time, he was living in quite a small house, so we played on the floor.
Nice.
And I think he said, "Well, this is interesting, but it's I didn't know people still did this. Play a battle game.
Right. Right.
I'll see what I can do." And he actually put us in touch with a local shop in Nottingham, it's called a Nottingham Model Soldier Shop, and they published it for us.
Wow.
But I did all the production work.
Okay.
So basically, I laid it out.
Right.
I doing some of the illustration, and they provided some of the, and probably Brian actually provided some other illustration just to fit into gaps, which mostly Tony Ackland did. It was Tony Ackland or Tony Yates, who were kind of friends of Brian's,
Right.
and they did rather, I say casual's not really the right word, but they did some of the illustrations for the Asgard adverts.
Right.
I think we just got to reuse them.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
And that was it.
all you did was phone someone and say, "Listen, would you like to do this?" So
Yeah,
back in the day,
that's right.
You can do that, but that's the beginning of a realization of a dream in a lot of ways.
It
Like,
is.
you come out of a high school and normally it's like, "What am I going to do?" And you
You will-
basically said, "I'm going to be a wargamer."
Well, as I say, we just did it anyway, and in fact, after I met Brian, because he was impressed by some of the figures we'd painted,
Right.
so he actually commissioned me to do painting for him.
Oh, wow.
So I painted a bit for him, and after I'd done that, he said, "Well, you can obviously paint a bit. Well, have you ever tried designing? Because the time, standards of design at the time were quite primitive."
Right.
And he said, "Well, I'll show you how I did it," because I'd done conversions, you see. And
Right.
And he just basically showed me how he made a figure, and I said, "Well, have a go."
There we go. Right.
And he gave me some dollies. Asgard had a series of metal, like an undressed figure,
Right.
which they refer to as a dolly, which you animate. And
Right.
so,
You change the position or whatever
yeah,
to what you want it to
we
be.
actually
and
had to
then-
carve it out. It was a big, quite thick dolly, and the idea was that you had to carve out the first level of detail into the metal,
Oh wow.
and then you dressed anything on top of it. So if you didn't carve it out properly, you would have you'd have a balloon man, because they're so big. Yeah. So anyway, I did those, and I didn't quite get on with that, so I then made my own dollies, which were thinner.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So more like a little metal skeleton, really,
Right.
which is more like what most people use these days.
Right.
And I did that. So I made a few figures.
So do you have any of those still?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the ones that you
few.
made.
Got
Oh
a few,
wow,
yeah.
that's great.
I made a few science fiction figures, and I don't think I made any fantasy figures. I think I made a few historicals, and not many. And I made a few. Yeah, I made a few science fiction adventurers that I think were cast but never sold, which I've still got. And then I went to college. You see, because I was at 19. I went to college for 3 years.
Right. And so what did you go do in college?
Archaeology.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I actually, excuse me, I actually did a little bit of archaeology in my degree too. So
Right. Yeah. Oh, cool.
very interesting, and it leads to history and a whole bunch of other stuff too.
Sure.
Right?
Well, and a lot of things. It also gives you a perspective on time. and history and civilization. So a lot of the things I was later to bring to Warhammer or 40k backgrounds were rooted in that interest in history and in archaeology.
Right, right.
Especially the deep archaeology. You know, when you start to talk about time periods of 10,000 years,
Right.
most people don't understand what it means.
Yeah, yeah. They can't visualize.
They can't visualize
passage of
it.
Time.
But you're talking about the end of the last ice age.
Right.
So the entirety of human civilization, in fact, and the entirety of pretty much all civilization in the sense of urban civilization, not half that.
Yeah, yeah. We haven't been around in this sense for all that long.
No,
Right.
no, it's relatively. It's not. So when you so when you go to something like 40k background and talk about thousands of years ago and 10,000 years ago,
Right.
it's asinine to imagine that 10,000 years before the present is the same as now.
Right.
Except they do, of course, because it's
Right.
convenient
Right.
for.
Right. It's almost more frightening. You don't want it to be the same as it is.
Yeah, I set it up to be unknowable.
Right.
In the same way in which it's unknowable to imagine how our ancestors lived 10,000 years ago.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I set the idea of the Horus Heresy up to be mythic,
Right.
and it's now become ordinary.
Right.
Everything's
right.
just exactly the same as it is
Isn't
10,000
it?
years later. It's stupid.
Did you? I know there's lots of references to tons of history and tons of historic figures and gods and everything like that. When you did you draw all that stuff in, and then what do you think of what happened after? Like now the fluff is such a huge part of that whole.
Well, I haven't paid any
Whole
attention
thing.
for the last 10 years. So I
Yeah,
don't really
yeah.
think
Well, I mean, there's lots of. It's been expanded. So when you're still working when Black Library started, though, right? Like.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So did that? Because you kind of created that whole fluffish, so or helped with that.
Yeah,
that fluff.
yeah. The background to the 40k universe was essentially. Well, I started it off with Rogue Trader,
Right.
and then it very quickly gained a momentum of its own. And I was either part of the team or I was leading the team, depending on various time, that was responsible for developing all that. And sometimes, particularly early on, when Brian was still there, Brian would come up with ideas, and because he was the boss, we were very respectful.
You say okay, let's go that way.
So we did, and some of the things we put in that were Brian's ideas were things like the Tyranids. The Tyranids came from Brian. I think the name Tyranid came from me, and the concept was because it's actually in Rogue Trader, I think.
Right.
But we sort of turned it on its head a bit and changed it, and Brian came up. He reinvented it as this kind of horror-based thing. Yeah.
When you're developing something like that, like for your newer games or whatever, or for old games or whatever you're doing now, do you see that instance of creation when you're trying to bring all that together? Is that an really exciting time, or is it a difficult time to get through it? I guess it probably has elements of both, but is there a time when you're up at night going, oh, these things got to align here,
Yeah.
or like what's the process of creating? Like
I don't know. It just happens.
it just happens.
Yeah. It's yeah. Sometimes you do. You do think on things and you wake up with a solution. I mean, it's just the way it sometimes happens. Yeah, I don't know quite why.
And I know you gamed last night, and how often do you game?
Oh Lord, it's just sometimes I don't get a game in for a few weeks, and other times you go, well, it'll be about. No, they wouldn't believe it. Don't tell them. Sometimes I don't get a game in for a good few weeks,
Right.
and something I've actually played a war game for maybe 3 weeks.
Right.
And other times you'll be going, oh, we're playing a game on Tuesday. Oh yeah, okay, I'll be there. And somebody else phoned you and go, we've got a game on Thursday. Do you want to play?
Right.
And suddenly I have 3 or 4 games in a week.
Right. Right.
So it can go. It can easily go. Last week I went from none to 3. None to 3.
None
Yeah.
to 3.
So none the previous week. Last 3 weeks ago, whatever. Then last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 games. And this time one. And yesterday was the first game I played this week. So yeah, quite often.
Quite often. Do you usually go from campaign, like a long campaign, or do you in a week would you play 3 different types of periods or something like that?
Yeah, well, I did 2 weeks. I played bolt action, Black Powder, Napoleonic game.
Right.
Part 1 of the one we played last night, in fact.
Right.
And then the other one was my new fantasy game, which is a variant of my Antares system.
Antares.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about both those? You can give
Well,
us a description of
Well,
Antares.
the fantasy one or the
Yeah.
Antares?
Yeah, both.
Yeah, Antares is the science fiction game I did with Warlord a few years ago.
Right.
And it's a kind of return to some of the ideas that I was experimenting with when I was a late teenager and before and during the creation of Rogue Trader. So it's a smaller scale game than the huge battle game that 40k became.
Right.
And it's got a strong narrative content to it. So most of the scenarios are adventuring rather than fighting. Although
cool.
fight is a war game, if you like.
Right.
And it uses the bolt action dice draw mechanic, which is very popular, I think.
Right. Yeah. It's a good one for sure.
It certainly works, and it uses a D10 system. So it's a D10 to hit, D10 resist rolls, and D10 command rolls.
So can it be cooperative then, or is it?
Yeah, it
is
can
it? So you say that there's conflict happens clearly, but does it always happen in a game?
Well,
Can you have a
the way-
game without kind of conflict?
Yeah, most of the scenarios I've set up are based on at least having 2 players who are opposed to each other.
Right.
But it's the core mechanics are set up so that it can play as a role playing game as well.
Oh wow. That's great.
That's the advantage of a D10. You can absolutely go D10, detail it with to D100, so you can
Right.
you can then get a full. In fact, when we did it, I had role playing in mind, but I've not really gone down that route. I've been a bit too busy doing other things.
Right.
But a couple of guys have more than one have actually said they'd quite like to have a go at it. So
Wow, that would be exciting.
yeah, well, sort of waiting for people to get their act together, really, because I think there is quite a lot of background already for the game,
Right.
but there isn't the sort of background you might need as a role play.
Right. Okay.
There's a lot of specific detail you need for that.
You can give a little bit of a sandbox though, and then people can kind of go
Yep.
in it. I mean, I would imagine people will like direction, like they want to be kind of coddled a little bit, but
Yeah, they do.
but you can give them something and say,
You can. The problem with Antares in terms of doing that is that he's such a big sandbox.
no,
Because one of the things when I set the 40k background up, I thought, well, let's create a background that almost anything can happen, and where the planets and worlds are separated in time. It's to an effect that you've got a medieval or feudal style society operating.
right,
So you're not necessarily knowing what's going on the other side of the galaxy at any one time.
right.
That's been eroded. That idea has been eroded in the 40k background over the years. In fact, it's almost non-existent now.
Right.
It's become almost like a World War II battlefront, as far as I could tell. I mean, I'm going to say I've not paid attention for 10 years, but
Right.
that was certainly
Right.
the case when I was
Right.
there. But the original idea was that you've got a feudal background, and because of that, you can have anything happening in one place and not affecting anything else.
Right.
So you can have individual societies and events.
So it's I can see how it gets a little bit
But for role-playing purposes, that's great because you can do anything.
right.
But for designing a role-playing game, it's not great because you can do anything.
Ah, yes. Damn it. Double-edged
So
sword.
what is this place like? Whatever you want.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And your fantasy? Do you think that you'd be able to contain that in the?
Oh, I've not
fantasy?
bothered. In the fantasy game, I've gone, look, we all know what a damn goblin is. It's one of these green sort of ratty things.
Right, right.
You know what orcs are, you know what trolls are,
Right.
Okay, there are variations.
Right.
But I'm not going to create a fantasy world. What's the point?
What's the point? Because
Well,
everybody gets to do it.
Yeah.
Everybody can do that on their own.
Yeah.
Basically, watch a movie, read a book.
Yeah, exactly, and more,
Right.
more to the point, all the people I'm likely to be playing with have got old Warhammer armies tucked away under the bed.
Right.
So I didn't do it with a view to it being a commercial operation. I just did it with a view to going, well, I quite enjoyed the Antares game system.
Right.
How about we play a few fantasy games?
Right.
So I've been doing that.
And so it translated quite well back and forth.
Yeah, to start with, I said, well, we know how to play Antares, let's not change it too much.
Right.
So I started off on the premise that I wouldn't change it. But of course, a game that's based largely on shooting, the mechanics tend to you skew them one way,
Right.
and a fantasy game has to be based on combat. So I had to do a little bit of reworking, and by the time you started doing some reworking, you end up doing lots of reworking, don't you? So the things do start to they diverge, which is done. But I think if you play Antares, it would be a familiar system.
Do you think that it leads to another version of Antares?
Yeah, possibly. One of the things I would thinking is
I don't want to put too much on your plate or anything like that.
it's not so much my plate. It's not my plate. It's the Warlord are not really in a position to support it.
Right.
So it's not, which means that commercially it's not really all that viable. So what I've done in fact is a core game set, core game rules,
Right.
and then army lists for everything that we've got. So essentially, it's a set of generic fantasy rules,
Right. Okay.
which you then customise with the army list.
Oh yeah.
So one of the army lists, for example, is the mythical Greek, because Nigel Stillman is a great collector of sort of mythical Greek and Amazonian armies, and he makes his own Amazon figures,
Right.
which is something which is quite remarkable.
Right.
And so I did an army list for his army,
Okay.
and it's quite cool.
Yeah. And so you just have it so you can bring anybody's miniatures in then. You know,
Yeah. So not,
Yeah.
they're not.
a bigger sandbox yet.
Yeah. In fact, some of the I've done a Celtic, a sort of Irish mythology army, based on Cuchulainn, and the all the Fenians, that sort of thing. And I've got a whole series of Celt models that I made back in the 1980s
Right.
that I'm using as the
Oh.
figures for that. So yeah, so my own. Nearly 35-year-old figures.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow. I have the same thing. Are they lead?
Yeah, they certainly are.
Yeah.
Probably mostly lead. They're cast by Warlord Games Foundry in the very early days of Foundry.
Right.
So I imagine they're a standard white metal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's mostly lead.
It's funny because I bring out my collection there in the back of the closet every once in a while. I bring it out and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna grab that box and find one of the old miniatures I used to paint. And they're so heavy. It's incredibly heavy.
Well, modern tin figures, like what they call pewter,
Right.
but they're lead free.
Right.
They'll be lighter
Right.
because the tin is lighter than lead.
Right.
They'll also be really, really hard and brittle.
Right.
Have you ever tried cutting them?
Oh yeah,
it's
that's
impossible, isn't it?
It's brutal.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
No conversions. Well, I mean you can, but
Yeah.
you need a Dremel or something like that. To get.
Well, you're just bending his piece is almost impossible.
Yeah,
And you can, and it's sharp as well.
Yeah.
It's horrible
Yeah.
stuff. It's ghastly, in fact. I don't know.
Yes, I remember. Do you remember when they translated that? I was living in Vancouver at the time, and I remember buying my first pewter and going, "Oh my God, what am I going to do with this?"
Yeah.
Because it was the material was so not friendly.
Yeah, it's not. It's not even
Yes.
a nice material to make toy soldiers out of.
Yeah,
It doesn't even cast all that well.
Wow. That's so. Oh, really? So it's
No.
even not bad on the other end.
No,
too.
it's more expensive.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
cast as well, and you
Yeah.
can't do it. You can't cut it or anything with it. The only
Yeah,
advantage
yeah.
to it is that it doesn't give you lead poisoning.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
Which
Really, I guess. You know.
Tick, okay, it doesn't give lead poisoning. But to be honest, it's not really in danger of lead poisoning from a cast figure.
Yeah, you get to jab yourself in there and keep a piece inside you.
Yeah, the real danger of toy soldiers for youngsters is in swallowing it.
Oh yeah.
And it's not poison, it's perforating your gut.
Oh right, of course. So which the pewter could do too.
Much worse, in fact. Like swallowing razor blades.
That's worse than razor blades.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So I got one more question for you. I know that you're playing, you're gaming, you're publishing, you're part of Warlord. Can you tell me? Do you think this is like the golden age of wargaming right now? We have so many choices and so many different ways everybody can go. Do you think this is a golden age, or do you think that there's something to be said about how things were developed in the past and that excitement? Do you think that it's different?
Different, isn't it? I mean, it was. I mean, when I'm talking about when I first started publishing, you can you imagine what the technology? You're too young.
Oh, I'm 50 though.
Yeah, okay. But the technology was
I
primitive.
only look good.
What's your secret? Yeah, the technology was primitive. It wasn't until the 1990s that we even went into a desktop publishing operation.
Right.
So before then, it was photomechanical, and in the 60s, it was. I can't barely imagine how it was done.
Right.
So, what that's meant is that nowadays, it's relatively easy to do something, put together something that's publishable,
Right.
and even looks great.
Yes. Yeah.
Which means the barrier to entry is quite low.
Right.
When I was doing it, you had to really want to do it,
Right.
and then you had to stick at
Yeah,
it
good.
until it was finished and there was blood on your fingers. And it was ag. And for every 10 people who started, I doubt that one finished.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, if you got knock off set of war games.
That's right.
There you go.
There you go. You get this.
And people these days as well, they have there's a lot of short rules about. There's an appetite for. Because that's me beeping at you. There's an appetite for skirmish style games, which are
Right.
very focused.
Right.
Well, the minute you go, here's a very focused subject, very limited range of models, limited board size. Hey, let's play this on a 2 foot by 2 foot table. Ha!
Right.
Coffee table. What's that? That's not a bloody war game, is it?
That's right.
The minute you do that, your rules just collapse down into nothing because you don't have to cope with all those situations that a standard set of skirmish war games does.
Right. And you don't get the grand effect like the game that you were playing last night. Like that must have been
Yeah, that was it.
like
Unusual.
Unusual, but still, it's you can have that. You have that whole world on the table.
Yeah, it was. That was quite an extraordinary game. I mean, there really was a lot on the table there. You're going round to the Perrys, I think, later.
Yeah.
aren't you?
Yeah. Hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, you might even get to see it.
Yeah.
The
I hope
remnants
so.
of
I hope
it.
so.
Just look how outnumbered we were.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I know, Alan. I hope he kept it on the table for me.
Yeah, might have done because he often Alan. Well, Underl might. He was around at Alan's place, in fact.
Right.
When we've played, they often leave it in situ and take photographs
Right.
because you can just take a little bit more time.
Right. Take your time with it.
Yeah. Otherwise, they'll take photographs during the game. And again, these days, a modern phone, the
Right,
camera
it's
on a
like-
phone.
You can do a lot with that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're better than a proper camera.
Yeah.
And a digital SLR,
Right.
good as they are, bit chunky, but you get them right.
And you can put it right beside
Yeah.
your miniature.
And they're
have
damn
it
good at taking photos of things which are where the lighting conditions aren't so great.
Right.
I don't know how it happens, but it's getting to the point now where I'd say that you're as well off with a good camera
Oh, yeah.
than a conventional digital camera.
Yeah.
And then you can get that picture into your book and publish it.
That's
Curses.
right. Curses.
We
Damn
dreamed of
them.
it.
Damn those youngsters.
Well, literally when we started, it was can you provide line artwork? Line artwork.
Right.
Yeah, you have to draw it with
Right.
black ink, Indian
Right.
ink, on a piece of paper and no shading.
No shit. That's right.
And that's all we could publish,
That's all you get.
which is your original D&D, isn't
Right.
it?
Exactly. That's what we were talking about. That monster manual, right? That art was like.
Monster Man is more sophisticated.
Was it?
Oh yeah, the original D&D, the little white box job.
Oh right. Yes. The
That
white
one,
box.
that-
Did you
yeah.
have a white box?
There were two versions of it. There was a white one and there was a slightly a beige coloured one.
Right.
That was the second edition.
Right.
That's the one we had.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's good. Do you still have it?
No.
Oh damn.
Well, I don't think I had everything.
right.
I think what it was the group.
The group did.
Would buy because they were expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Anything American was really expensive in
Because they had to
Britain.
ship it here.
Yeah, and because we were bankrupt.
Oh
So,
yeah.
so they were terrible sort of, the exchange rate had collapsed. And
Right.
anything American just cost a fortune.
Right.
American figures came over from Ralph Arthur and McEwen. Some other ones as well. Yeah, these are very, very early American figures. And we sent off for them and they were, a British figure was about, I don't know, 20p. These were £1.
Wow.
So that cost. So we were thinking
Yeah.
British figure, American figure.
Right. That's right.
When they turned up, it was British figure, American
And
figure.
figure.
Slightly smaller. The Ralph Arthur figures, they were really
Damn.
quite tiny. And the McEwen figures, they were really slender.
Slender.
Little. I said, God, I paid £1 for that.
That's awesome. All right, we'll let you go. I know that
No
you
worries.
got lots to do. Thank you
Thanks
so
very
much. I
much,
really appreciate it.
Lovely to
Nice
see you
to
again.
see you again.
Yeah,
I
you-
actually was able to talk this time, so I'm pretty proud of myself.
Yeah, you didn't even have to buy me a drink. Could
Yeah,
you?
that's right.
How did that happen?
Next time.
Yeah.
Well, the trip isn't that far away.
It's not, is it? I think we met in the trip last time.
We
in
did,
fact.
yeah. Well, we met first at GW, and then we met at the trip. I was a little bit better at the trip because I had a couple in me already.
Yeah, it was good going. And I think we played. I can't remember if I can't remember what the game was. We played something.
Bang. Did you play
Was it Bang? I thought it might be Bang.
One of my favorite memories, because what happened was one of my tour participants taught you how to play Bang, and
Yeah.
he was ecstatic that he was able to teach Rick Priestley.
I'd played it before, I think.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, but I probably had totally forgotten how to play
Oh,
it.
right. There you go. So he twigged memories of that. So that was he's very excited about playing with you.
Like
And,
Bang. We played it at the War Master Grand European Finals
oh yeah.
when they were in Brighton.
Okay.
The War Master players, they used to organise this sort of grand European get together.
Right.
European GT it was, and they used to go to hotels in Austria and the Netherlands.
Right.
And they were beautiful hotels. Every service was fantastic. The rooms were brilliant. Not expensive.
Right.
Food was great.
Calling Ranger mobile.
It was really nice. And the guys in Britain said, "Well, we really ought to organise one, because we always go over. So we'll organise one in Britain." But you can't. Places like that cost a fortune in Britain.
Right. Of course.
Whereas in Germany and the Netherlands, it was quite doable. As soon as they got to Britain, they couldn't get anywhere halfway decent. The only place they could find was an out-of-season holiday camp,
Right.
which has these chalets, built in the 1950s originally,
Oh, wow.
but updated,
Right. Right.
called Butlins, and it was the shabbiest,
Shabby.
horriblest thing, and we had to share the event with a British clown convention. So as we were wandering around playing our games, and we'd then go out into the sort of mall and buy a few bits and pieces. There's all these clowns.
Like literally, they were all dressed up clowns.
Yeah, dressed up clowns. And there was some members of the public there as well, and the clowns were being jolly. But then after the public went home, there was just us and the clowns. And the clowns were not jolly at all.
No, really, they were just busy.
As far as I could say, they were drunk and disorderly and generally miserable.
So they were all they were the mean drunks.
Yeah, the mean drunk. Yeah, they were scared. No, it was quite surreal. And as we walked back to our chalet, which of course is a little bit away and everything, we were walking past all these clown cars parked up on the road.
Oh, no.
It was just insane. This is freaky.
Well, they were pissed off because they would have to get back in the clown cars, and everybody would have to get in there. It would have been crowded, right? So
That was strange.
yeah, that's a good.
It was War Master and weird clowns.
Warmaster and weird clowns.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And there you go. These things happen.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
It's all right.
It was awesome.
Yeah. It's nice to see you.
Thank you for watching, and if you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button. Also, remember to comment and let us know how we're doing. We throw a lot of love into these videos, but we're always looking for new ways to make them more enjoyable. And remember, get out there, have an adventure, and fill up your life.